noticed that he basically said that Boris Johnson was responsible for scuppering negotiations in the war in Ukraine. What do you think to that? Do you believe that or not? And when it comes to Abdul Eedi, now police reckon he's more likely than not jumped off a bridge and died. Do you think that's true, or do you reckon it's the police covering for their own incompetence and not being able to find him? I'll be talking to a former detective about that. Also, junior doctors, they're voted to go on strike again for another 5 days. Do they still have your support or not? And get this, Rishi Sunak's tax return has been published. He's paid over £500,000 in tax on earnings that are above £2 million last year. Some people, I can tell you, they're furious. How out of touch can you be? They say. What do you make to it? Well, we're going to get stuck into all of that and more. But before we do, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you very much. Good evening from the GB newsrooms. Just gone 6 o'clock. Leading the news tonight, it's now believed the chemical attacker Abdul Eedi, who injured a mother and her 2 daughters, may have fallen into the Thames. In a briefing at Scotland Yard earlier this afternoon, police said their main working hypothesis is that he has gone into the water, but they say no body has yet been found. The Metropolitan Police say the 35-year-old was last seen on CCTV leaning over the railings of Chelsea Bridge. For those watching on TV, you can see that figure just walking across the bridge around 11:30 p.m. last Wednesday. That was 4 hours after the incident in South London, and that was the last time he was seen. Marine units, we understand, will now be carrying out searches of the River Thames, but they say it could be very difficult to locate a body due to fast-moving water. Police have also added the victim of the attack on the 31st of January is still very ill in hospital and unable to speak to officers. In other news, Piers Morgan has accused the Duke of Sussex of what he called ruthless intrusion into the private lives of the royal family. Here's the Daily Mirror editor, former Daily Mirror editor, speaking to reporters earlier.
Invading the privacy of the royal family is utterly reprehensible. And on that, I share Prince Harry's opinion. I just wish he'd stop doing it.
Well, that comes after Prince Harry's claim against Mirror Group newspapers was settled today. He singled out the former Daily Mirror editor, saying he knew what was going on when phones were hacked for stories written about the royals. Following today's hearing, Harry's lawyer said Mirror Group newspapers would make an interim payment of £400,000 in damages. The Israeli Prime Minister has announced a plan to evacuate civilians from Rafah in the south of Gaza, alongside a strategic effort to defeat remaining Hamas fighters in the region. It comes as international pressure on Israel intensifies. Despite criticism from the US president and other warnings from aid groups, Israel did launch a deadly airstrike on Rafah, the last refuge for many Gazans, and that raised concerns about the potential high death toll. Washington has emphasised the need for Israel to consider the plight of civilians before any further military operation in Rafah. And Joe Biden's described Israel's response as over the top. Back here in the UK, Rishi Sunak says that President Putin's accusations that the West and NATO are the cause of the Ukraine war are, he says, clearly ridiculous. Speaking to Tucker Carlson, the Russian president said the invasion was necessary to prevent Ukraine from posing a threat to Russia by joining NATO. Putin also told Carlson that he has no interest in expanding the war or having any dialogue with the US president, unless, he says, certain demands are met.
If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about?
We've heard today that junior doctors will go on strike again for another 5 days later this month in their long-running dispute over pay. The BMA says that the walkout will be between the 24th of February and the 28th of February, and it comes after their latest talks with the government broke down. Health Secretary Victoria Adkins has criticised the move, saying the actions show that the BMA aren't ready to be reasonable when it comes to a pay offer. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says it's up to the government to put an end to it.
I don't want these strikes to go ahead. I don't think anybody who uses the NHS wants the strikes to go ahead. I don't think the doctors want them to go ahead. What I do want is for the government to get in the room and negotiate and bring this to an end.
Rishi Sunak's personal tax documents have today revealed that he paid over £500,000 in UK tax last year. The Prime Minister's earnings include nearly £1.3 million in capital gains, with over £290,000 from other interests and dividends. Rather than a full tax return, Downing Street published a summary of his taxable income in the UK. And as a former resident of California in the US, the Prime Minister also separately paid just over $6,800 in tax in the same year. Essex police have today confirmed that 2 dogs that fatally attacked a grandmother in Jaywick were XL bullies. 68-year-old Esther Martin was reportedly visiting her 11-year-old grandson when she was attacked by those 2 dogs on Saturday. They have since been destroyed. A 39-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of dangerous dog offences, but he has since been released on conditional bail until March. And finally, Irish police are investigating the death of a 6-year-old boy who was found in a car early this morning. A woman in her 30s was arrested near Dunmore East and is in custody, we understand. Irish police are conducting inquiries and awaiting post-mortem results. Investigators are at the scene. They're gathering evidence, and locals have also expressed their sadness and their shock. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. I'm Michelle Dewbin. I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. We made it, didn't we? Almost to the end of a week. I'm exhausted today. I've been so busy moving around all day as though I am a woman. The cooking, the cleaning. I've done a bit of skipping, a little bit of dancing, a little bit of shimmying. It's all been going on. I can tell you, it's exhausting moving around all day long as if you're a woman. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should have watched my programme last night, you missed a belter. Anyway, keeping me company tonight on my programme until 7 o'clock tonight. I've got a new face. We like those, everybody, don't we? Sketch writer and columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant. Good evening to you.
Hello.
And the trade unionist and the broadcaster. And someone who hasn't been moving around all day as though he's a woman, Paul Embry.
Glad you didn't say an old face.
I know, well, I tell you, I think I've done a bit of damage, actually, to my shoulders when I just practice that shimmy. When you get to my age, you probably shouldn't be shimmying anything, quite frankly. Anyway, look, you know the drill, don't you, on this programme? It's not just about us, it's very much about you guys at home. You can get in touch with me all the usual ways. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet me, X me at gbnews. Let's kick off, though. Did you see the interview last night, early hours? Of course, I'm talking about Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. Did you watch it? I've got to say, the first half an hour, I had to almost, convince myself to stay with it. I was so excited about this interview. I had the popcorn ready. Yeah. And then when I started going back, was it like the 9th century or even earlier that he took us back to? And he says, if you'll indulge me for 30 seconds to a minute, I'll give you a bit of history. Half an hour later, everyone, he was still going. Have you seen that interview yet or not? Anyway, a few key points came out of that. One of the ones that I want to touch on with you guys tonight is what he had to say about our previous Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Let's just play that, shall we, for those of you that perhaps didn't see it.
Even put his preliminary signature on the document I am telling you about. But then he publicly stated to the whole world, we were ready to sign this document, but Mr. Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came and dissuaded us from doing this, saying it was better to fight Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia. And we agreed with this proposal. Look, his statement has been published. He said it publicly. Can they return to this or not? The question is, do they want it or not?
Well, there you go. What do you make to that at home? Madeline, your thoughts?
Well, I thought it was fascinating that he tried so hard that Boris Johnson and Britain actually played quite a big part in the interview. You know, it was mentioned a lot. I think it's partly, obviously, I think you have to obviously take anything that Vladimir Putin says with a pinch of salt. And Boris Johnson and Ukraine have both disavowed this story that it was Boris Johnson who put the brakes on a peace deal in Istanbul. But, you know, I think the fact that he is, you know, trying to put the cat amongst the pigeons, as he did when he said, for example, that it was the CIA who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's kind of what you expect. But the fact that Britain played a big role, to me, that's testament to the fact that, you know, we were quite crucial in those early days of the war in kind of keeping the anti-Putin alliance together in the West, making sure that countries like America and Germany especially didn't kind of go soft. So I think that's a testament to the fact that we actually did play quite a big role, particularly in the early days of the war.
And do you think that's a good thing?
Well, I think it was morally right. I mean, Putin is a, you know, unambiguous authoritarian leader who's blatantly invaded a neighbour and is also a strategic enemy of Britain's. I don't think this shows an absence of self-interest. I mean, I think we're already seeing, for example, in the Middle East, how if America taking a very soft line on Iran has led to escalation. I think you do sometimes have to put on to, you know, show your strategic enemies that they can't get away with that kind of aggression.
Paul Embry?
Well, I don't know if we'll ever get to the truth, but I think there is some evidence, actually, that did happen, that Boris Johnson did intervene. And in April 22, there were peace talks going on, and Boris Johnson flew out to Kiev, and shortly after those peace talks came to an end. And the leader of the parliamentary party, Zelensky's own parliamentary party, said at the time, Boris Johnson intervened and scuppered it. So, you know, we can dismiss it as some sort of wild conspiracy theory, or we can say, actually, you know, there is some evidence that there was intervention from Boris Johnson. Of course he's going to deny it. He would say that, wouldn't he? I think the bigger question is, how do we get to the end of this awful war in which thousands of people have lost their lives? The truth is, one thing Putin said, and I'm no fan of his, but he said, and he was right, it can only come about through a negotiated settlement. At some point, there is going to have to be a negotiated settlement to end this war. And it strikes me that many people in the West are not willing to grasp that, even though it's pretty clear, I think, that Ukraine is not going to win this war. I mean, I have to say that. I'm opposed to the invasion. I'm no fan of Putin. But I think most people recognise now that Ukraine is not going to win this war. So there's two options. You know, we either continue encouraging them to fight, in which case they will probably go down to a slow and very painful and very costly defeat, or we say, look, we've got to try to help you strike a deal which would be peace, but peace with some honour. And I just don't think that people in the West have grasped that nettle, which then invites you to ask the question, well, why is it that leaders in the West are so obsessed with this particular war, are so focused on this particular war, are so keen for this particular war to continue? For all of their denials that this is a proxy war, I think every intervention that we've seen from leaders of the West, you know, America and Britain and others, shows that we do see it as a proxy war. And I think that's a very sad thing, and has ultimately, I think, prolonged the war and led to thousands of deaths that otherwise wouldn't have happened.
Was there... Oh, sorry.
So do you think that, you know, that Ukraine will simply have to accept handing over a large chunk of its territory to Russia in exchange for peace, and that that's a state of affairs that we should be comfortable with?
Well, we don't know what they would be prepared to accept. We don't know what Putin would demand. I think we have to look at something like the Minsk Accords, for example, which was the basis of some sort of settlement. On the one hand, you know, guarding Ukraine's territorial sovereignty, but at the same time giving a certain amount of autonomy to the ethnic Russians in the Donbass region. And both sides blamed each other for Minsk, you know, not in the end succeeding. But I think if we're serious about peace, then, and I don't think many people in the West are, then you have to be looking at something like that. And the truth is, Madeleine, that wherever there is a conflict over territory, unless one side completely vanquishes the other, there has to be a compromise. We saw that in Northern Ireland. You know, for the same people who are now saying in the West, under no circumstances should we negotiate with Putin, all glorified the Belfast Agreement, where effectively we negotiated with the IRA. And gave them a certain amount of what they wanted. So there's a stinking hypocrisy about this whole "don't negotiate with Putin" thing.
Well, the thing is, I think I agree with a lot of what you've said, and particularly about how, you know, it's difficult for Ukraine to win the war outright. It's also going to be very difficult for Russia to win the war outright. I mean, it's pretty. They've taken severe losses. It's interesting that Putin recently had to act to prevent a anti-war challenger running in the election. They had to come up with some kind of constitutional, legal jiggery-pokery to prevent one of his opponents from running against him. And this guy had just come out of nowhere and had a huge following, basically on an anti-war slate. And there are so many families in Russia who've lost loved ones or have can't reach their loved ones. And Russia has always had historic form in treating its civilians and its soldiers like cannon fodder. So, you know, Putin expected it to be very quick and easy to take Ukraine, and that didn't happen either. So I think where we're at is a kind of unpleasant stalemate.
I think one of the things we could offer is you know, neutrality in terms of NATO, because that is Putin's big bugbear. You know, if Ukraine joins NATO, that effectively is the enemy on his doorstep. Now, I think that's probably a price worth paying to say, look, there does probably need to be that buffer zone. In the same way, by the way, that if it was the other way round and a Chinese/Russian military alliance, you know, sent troops in or set up bases in Cuba, as happened in the 1960s, of course, with the old Soviet Union. Does anyone doubt that the White House would go absolutely ballistic, no pun intended, absolutely ballistic at that? They would of course say, absolutely no way are we having this military alliance on our doorstep. You know, it's not acceptable. There needs to be some sort of buffer zone. Well, the truth is, whether we like it or not, Putin and the Russians look at Ukraine in a very similar way. You know, NATO was set up explicitly as an anti-Soviet organisation. We know that. So when the Russians see that organisation encroaching ever closer to its border, naturally they are going to think, look, this is a bit disconcerting for us, in the same way, as I say, it would be for America if it was the other way around. But we don't think of that. And in the West, I don't think we ever look at how a situation is perceived by our so-called enemy. If we were to do what they're doing, or if they were to do what it is that we're doing, how would we react to that? And, you know, I think when it comes to other wars, we often call for peace. We often call for ceasefires. In this one, I think it's striking.
Do we? Where are those voices that are often calling for peace? Because all I ever seem to hear is people desperately trying to get involved and fare strikes and all the rest of it.
No, I think not always, absolutely, not always. But there are some cases where, you know, when India, Pakistan, for example, occasionally have their skirmishes over the Kashmir region, people are very quick to call for peace when they think they don't necessarily have a strategic interest. They haven't done in this, and what they've done is they've egged Ukraine on and on and on, and we're now in an absolute quagmire, and there doesn't seem any way out of it. And I think we have to take a certain amount of responsibility for that.
What do you make to it all at home? I can tell you now, you're quite divided. I'll just give you a flavour. Bernard says you would have to be the most gullible person in the room to believe anything at all that comes out of Putin's mouth. But Mac, however, he has a completely different view. He says, in summary, the West has Putin derangement syndrome. What do you make to that? Whose side are you on? Did you watch that interview? And what did you make to it? What did you think about Tucker Carlson, the way that he conducted that interview? A lot of people saying that he basically gave Putin too much of an easy ride. Did he? Or not? You tell me. After the break, I want to talk to you about Abdul Eedi. Apparently, he has gone into the Thames suspected to be dead. Really? I'm going to speak to a former detective's take on that. I also want to talk to you about Joe Biden, his response to the fact that he's losing his memories, and lots more, not least Rishi Sunak's tax return. Have you seen how much he earned last year? I'll see you in 2.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are
so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engine, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have two SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had two brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
The growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Rishi Sunak here. Join me for a special GB News People's Forum Live on Monday the 12th of February. I want to hear about the issues that matter to you. For your chance to be part of the audience and to put your questions to me, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com. See you there.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. The sketch writer and columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Madeleine Grant, is alongside me, as is the trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry. Welcome back, everybody. And if you were just listening there, you will have heard Rishi Sunak, of course, on Monday. What a treat for us all. We will be live from the northeast. I say we because, yes, they're letting me out, everybody. I will be there as well. It's your opportunity, not ours, yours, to ask Rishi Sunak whatever questions you have for him. If you're in and around the northeast, come and join us. If not, get your questions to us. Get out your smartphone. Take a picture of that QR code on the screen and it'll tell you all the details that you need to know. There you go. I'm looking forward to it. I hope that you are too. Now, let's talk about a story that we've been covering, haven't we now? I think we're on day 10. Of course, I'm speaking about that suspected chemical attacker, Abdul Eedi. The Met Police have issued an update a couple of hours ago now, actually, saying that death, I'm quoting this, death is the most probable outcome for the guy that they have not managed to find. We've seen all the CCTV footage, haven't we? There he is. If you're listening, not watching, I'll describe it. The fella's meandering along like he ain't got a care in the world, making absolutely no attempts whatsoever to hide his damaged face. I've got to remind you all that he did wander along Vauxhall Bridge, and in case you're not familiar with London, Vauxhall Bridge, at the end of it, it has MI6. So, I mean, the guy has sauntered past one of the most high-security buildings in London, and they still can't find him. Anyway, joining me now is former detective Peter Blexley. Now, Peter, some of my viewers, I know them well, they'll be getting in touch now saying, this whole theory about him jumping into the river, this is to cover the backsides of the Met Police because basically they're just not doing their job in finding him. What would you say to that?
Abdul Shakur Eedi originally from Afghanistan, who smuggled himself into the UK in the back of a lorry, who made multiple applications for asylum, and in between two of those applications was convicted of 2 sex offences, who was, of course, wanted for a vicious, wicked, vindictive attack on a woman and 2 young children, during which a number of police officers and members of the public also got injured, is dead.
How do you know?
End of story.
How do you know?
Because the Metropolitan Police have done exhaustive CCTV trawls. And what viewers and listeners might not appreciate, and that's perfectly understandable, is that a negative CCTV non-sighting is often as important as an actual sighting, because what it allows you to do through a process of elimination is say, well, if somebody is not seen travelling through this particular spot where there is CCTV coverage, then they must have taken a different route. And that's a perfectly reliable theory to work upon. What the Met have done is done exhaustive checks of CCTV systems, authority-owned, privately owned, publicly owned, that comprehensively placed him on Chelsea Bridge. No dispute about that whatsoever. What happens thereafter is that exhaustive CCTV coverage shows that he did not exit that bridge. So whilst the Metropolitan Police will tell you it's a working hypothesis, I'm telling you he went in the Thames, which at this time of the year, in fact most of the year, is largely unsurvivable.
So that bridge, it's got, as you say, it's got CCTV on it, hence we've got those sightings of him on said bridge. It's also quite a fairly busy bridge. It's one of the key crossing points for southwest London. So you'll have lots of cars that are driving by, many of which will have dash cams. You've got apartments overlooking that bridge, many of which will have security cameras, doorbells, whatever it is. So if your theory is absolutely spot on, i.e. he's gone over the bridge or into the Thames, why isn't there footage of that?
Because not everywhere in London and the UK has blanket CCTV coverage. There is legislation around the scale and the view that a CCTV camera can have. If it's local authority, they get a greater amount of permission to cover things like traffic and the such like. If you have CCTV on a private dwelling, then you are not actually permitted to capture the images that go beyond the boundaries of that dwelling. So not everywhere in London and the UK has blanket coverage.
So let's rewind then and go back to the night of the attack. I think it was about 7:30 there or thereabouts, wasn't it? And the police were asking people if you've got dash cam footage or Ring doorbell footage or whatever, can you have a look at it and let us know? There was a lot of criticism though at the time, and I've got to admit from me as well, saying, well, why didn't the police release a descriptive image or a descriptive term or whatever prior to 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon? What are we missing?
Oh, yes, of the following day. And in addition to Eedi walking very close to the security services building, he actually walked past New Scotland Yard not long after the attack. We're only talking about a matter of 2 or 3 hours after the attack.
Why didn't the Met Police issue a descriptive either image or, you know, just description before 1:30 the next afternoon, by which time this fellow's probably long gone?
Yeah, that will be a question for the Metropolitan Police to answer. And I am never a defender of the indefensible. But this investigation...
But is that indefensible? Because a lot of people said to me, oh, Michelle, who do you think you are? You think you know better than the Met Police? There was people have been saying to me and other people that have my view, well, hang on a second, maybe the police didn't want to endanger people, maybe this is just standard policing protocol not to issue those descriptions, is it?
Or maybe in 2024, where we have senior police leadership that are so fluffy, woke and liberal, they're often scared of their own shadows. Did they want to know comprehensively that the images they were going to release were exactly of the person that they wanted? Did they act with caution? Again, we would have to ask them. But this investigation has proceeded in the manner that it has done because, as the Met have admitted, they've had their best detectives, experienced detectives, detectives who are used to conducting fugitive hunts for terrorists and murderers and the like, which is all well and good. But if you live in London and you get burgled, have your car stolen, are a shopkeeper plagued by shoplifting, and, as a report described today, are reporting offences of child sex abuse, then unfortunately you will find that the largest police service in the land often comes up very, very short indeed.
Indeed, and actually everyone will be familiar with the story by now. He got back into his car, didn't he, and tried to escape, but actually he crashed the car. If he'd have managed to get into that car and drive off, lots of streets around those parts are 20-mile-an-hour zones. If he'd have driven faster than 20 miles an hour, I can bet you bottom dollar he'd have been caught there. They don't mess around with those kind of things. Anyway, Madeleine and Paul, what do you make to it all?
Well, I definitely don't want to disagree with Peter. Having seen him in action on the show Hunted, I think I would trust him to know where people are hidden or not. I mean, obviously, it's tempting to take the view that there is a little bit of backside covering, should we say, because it has been one of these cases where it seems to speak to the fears that many people have around the police, that the inaction and the inability to act quickly and efficiently. And, of course, the fact that he's on camera walking past MI6 does not help. But, yes, I think Peter's probably about right here.
And I, as well, bow down to Peter's operational experience and completely accept what he says. I think the wider debate for the public, almost certainly, which will continue, is why was this guy in the country? He had his asylum application, as we understand it, rejected twice, converted to Christianity, made an appeal, a tribunal said... Converted
to Christianity. I mean, how you can say that with a straight face and believe that it's true is beyond me.
Well,
that fella didn't convert to Christianity. Well, actually, he probably did on paper to try and get in, but I mean, come on now.
And that's the debate that we need to have. And, of course, there was the not insignificant matter of his conviction for sexual crimes in 2018. Yeah. So those are the big questions, and they're not going to go away.
Well, there you go. You can make your own mind up. But for now, Peter Blexley, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you. Let me just move on, because if you are a regular viewer to this programme, you will recall that a few days ago we were looking back at Biden, some of the kind of mistakes that he has been making, and asking whether or not he's safe, actually, to be the President of the United States. Let's have a little listen to what he has had to say.
I know there's some attention paid to some language in the report about my recollection of events. There's even reference that I don't remember when my son died. How in the hell dare he raise that?
Totally. How bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad I let you speak. That's
your memory has gotten worse, Mr. President?
My memory has not gotten. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since I've become president.
What do you make to that, ladies and gents at home? Did he convince you or not? Paul Embry?
Well, I'm against any form of ageism. I think in any job, if you're good enough, you're young enough. But I have to say, this is quite painful, actually. What we're witnessing in real time is the decline, the very sharp decline, I think, of an 81-year-old president. It's a demanding job for even a young person. And I think it's pretty clear that he cannot realistically stand again. And the special counsel report that came out yesterday was absolutely devastating. It actually said openly that the president's recall was, his memory is strictly limited. He couldn't remember key facts about his personal life, about his political career. And I just think that his friends and allies should be saying to him, in his personal interests and in the US's interests, look, Joe, it's time to step aside and let someone else pick up the baton.
Yeah.
Madeleine?
Well, there's been an extraordinary, and I think quite a shameful, almost the word is like an omerta amongst many journalists in the US especially, that they would not talk about this. And it was one of these unsayable things for a very, very long time. And now it's become so obvious that it can no longer be ignored. And I think they have done the American people and the world, the president is the leader of the free world, a great disservice by not having that conversation. And also the sheer arrogance of the Democrat high command that last year, for example, they were trying to prevent there from being any kind of open debate amongst any other Joe Biden and any other challenges to that role on the basis that they thought it would be better from a PR perspective simply to kind of have a coronation for Biden because he might come off badly in any sort of public debate. It was very kind of command and control, and they've created this most almighty mess for them. And I think Paul is exactly right that it's now getting to a point where surely something has to be done about this, because otherwise it will just give the presidency to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, and I said this when we discussed this a few days ago as well, there's something about this that makes me feel really uncomfortable, because he is an elderly man. And, I agree with you. I do think you're watching someone that kind of decline, and something about that, and then the commentary about that decline, makes me feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it is a conversation that needs to be had, given the role that he has. John says allowing Biden to continue, Michelle, is a form of abuse, and it's actually dangerous. He's likely to declare war without anybody knowing. I'm not sure it'd ever get to that stage, but I hear your point. John says, White House, he should be in a care home. It's frightening that he's in charge of the US. And you see, this is the point, John, because John ends his sentence there by basically saying he's a public laughingstock. And I don't like that.
I know.
That makes me uncomfortable.
And the thing is as well, it's not like he's a monarch where you can go on, and it doesn't really matter if your health declines, because most of your powers are exercised by the government on your behalf.
Yeah.
He is the president and he's the commander-in-chief of the US Armed Forces, and he has got to have his finger on the pulse. He's got his finger on the button, but he's got to have his finger on the pulse as well. And it's just pretty clear, I think, that he's just not... I mean, even in the press conference where he was rebutting the allegation that his memory is failing, he confused the presidents of Egypt and Mexico. It was humiliating, really.
It's a good point, because actually in America they have extraordinary levels of executive power vested in the president, far more than many comparable world leaders, so the stakes are even higher in the States.
What do you make to it all at home? I'll also bring in your response as well to that Abdul Eedi story. Do you buy that story, what the police are saying, that, you know what, he's dead? Are you slightly more suspicious? Do you think, hang on a second, are you just saying that because you actually can't find him? Your thoughts on all of that. I also want to talk to you as well about junior doctors. They've announced yet more strikes. Are you still backing them? And Rishi Sunak, did you hear how much he earned last year? Is it any of our business or not? I'll see you in 2.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
We have let Islamist extremism into Britain, we've let it fester, and now we've let it win. Our absolutely spineless surrender merchant political top brass are rolling over while government ministers wear stab vests and quit their jobs in fear. Veteran Tory Minister Mike Freer has had death threats from Islamists, as well as an alleged arson attack on his office. The motive there has still not been established. He's standing down because he doesn't want to die. I cannot emphasise how important this is. A minister of the government is quitting his job because he doesn't want to be killed by a lunatic jihadi. And our Prime Minister has said absolutely nothing. Nothing. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak said he was saddened. Is that it? Our Prime Minister should have been out on the steps of Downing Street saying that we will not be intimidated. We will not let this continue. Enough is enough. What does he do instead? He tweets about XL bullies. Yeah, fantastic. Where's Keir Starmer on this? Well, he's conducting focus groups on how to get the Muslim vote back, so he's hardly going to come out all guns blazing, is he? Ed Davey? Well, there's no way a Liberal Democrat leader would come out and admit that his ideology has helped turn Britain into a poster nation for multicultural failure. The police have let protesters, which include rabid anti-Semites, rampage around London every flipping Saturday for the last 3 months. And today, they are finally saying that they don't support some of the protests, which in the past have included a now banned terror group and people holding up anti-Jewish signs. They're saying, please don't march down Whitehall. All right, but will you do anything to stop them if they ignore you? I doubt it. I honestly cannot believe that we have sunk to the level where a serving minister stands down because of threats from extremists and our Prime Minister just doesn't feel the need to address it?
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've still got Paula Embry and Madeline Grant keeping me company. You guys, again, you are quite divided on the Putin. We discussed that at the beginning of the programme. I have to say, you really are divided. Lots of you saying, as I mentioned at the start of the programme, that I actually don't believe anything Putin says. Lots of you saying that some of the things that he was saying actually made sense. What do you think to the Abdul Eedi situation about whether or not he's gone over the bridge or not? Your thoughts on that one. But for now, let's talk junior doctors, shall we? Because they're going on strike again for the 10th time since March last year, apparently. They are still, of course, demanding that 35% increase in their salary. It's all about pay restoration, isn't it? Back until 2008. Paul Embry, your thoughts?
The amount would just simply make up for 15 years of fall in real wages, which they've suffered, which many people in the private sector and in the public sector have suffered. And when you look at their increased workload...
Right, can I just ask you quickly on that first point? Because there'll be viewers writing in. So when you say it's 15 years, you know, of pay...
Fall in real wages.
Yeah. But then people will write in and say, but actually a lot of people joined the kind of pathway to be a junior doctor after 2008, so they knew the T's and C's and they knew the pay, and it was cool for them, and they accepted it.
But they didn't, because let's say they joined, you know, in 2012. Let's pluck a year out of the air. They didn't think that they were going to have another, you know, 13 years or whatever it is of fall in real wages.
No,
because,
but what I'm saying
you join on particular terms.
Yeah, but if you joined on 2012, I'm picking your year. But if you joined on 2012, or you became a junior doctor or whatever in 2012. If you was unhappy with the wage then and thought that it should have been what it was in 2008, well, why did you accept the T's and C's from 2012 then?
Many of them have been in place since 2008, let's be honest. But the idea that you should accept fall in real wages just because you joined on a particular time, on particular terms and conditions, I don't accept. And as I was going to go and say, if you look at the increase in workloads, if you look at the horrendous waiting lists that they're trying to navigate at the moment inside the NHS and the pressure that these doctors are under, I think it's unreasonable to say to them year after year after year after year for 15 years, accept a real terms pay cut and stop complaining.
Madeline?
I have a lot of sympathy with that, and in fact for the junior doctors themselves, and I have many friends who are my age who are in this position, you know, the level of burnout that they're experiencing, the workload, etc. I have so much sympathy for that. But actually, the story since
would being paid differently,
that's
then
the
you
thing.
get burnout then?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I think the 35% is incredibly unrealistic, particularly because the story for almost all workers in the economy since the financial crash, private sector, where the pensions are nowhere near as generous as what the junior doctors must have, has been similar. I mean, we are where we are as a country, as an economy, and we can't just conjure money up out of nowhere. It's incredible. And the thing
But we do, though, Madeline. We do. When, you know, we conjured up billions of pounds out of nowhere during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, and look what happened to the economy after that. It's not sustainable. You know, borrowing rates go up when you do that, and
that was a one-off expenditure, wasn't it? It was a one-off. It wasn't annual.
We're able to find money, billions of pounds of money, when it comes to things like bailing out the banks, as we did 16 years ago. Found billions upon billions to do that. Whenever there's the next new military escapade, whether it's invading Iraq or something, we suddenly find hundreds of billions down the back of the sofa. You know, the COVID pandemic, as I say, and yet when it comes to really, really important things like, you know, protecting and funding properly in the National Health Service and paying decent wages to people working in those services, we suddenly go, no, we've got to retrench, money's tight, we can't afford that. And you know, people understand that there's a real contradiction, that we can find money when it suits but can't when it doesn't suit.
Well, I mean, can we always? And also the fact is that politicians make terrible decisions with money. They often do, I would agree. But ultimately, the money that pays for the wages of anyone in the public sector comes from people in the private sector who are also suffering and have nowhere near the level of generosity in their pension arrangements that junior doctors would have. So I think really the burnout and churn is very real, and perhaps they should be paid more to try to entice more people.
Do you think any of this is political?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's political. But then again, I think this could be the new normal in a way, because Labour are saying that they wouldn't agree to the 35% either. So we might find that even if we end up with a Labour government later this year, that these strikes would become a feature of life. And the other thing is also that we've had so many strikes in the last few years, but before that, it wasn't really such an aspect of daily life that was as noticeable and as disruptive. And I think perhaps because there was so much industrial action in the 70s, and our politicians have actually not had that kind of experience of how to even talk to and negotiate properly, you know, that they've lost that muscle memory. And now they're a bit stuck, and I think that's probably true of the political class in general.
What do you think to it at home? I do confess, I do think that junior doctors should be paid more, but how much more? I guess that is the million-dollar question. David says, my opinion of doctors is at an all-time low. They are breaking their oath by just walking out on their patients simply for money. Oh, David, you're not messing around. Is that a view that's shared by anyone else at home? Les says, what about the rest of us? Are we not suffering with pay reductions as well? The junior doctor strikes are contributing now to the waiting list. Keith says, maybe if doctors worked the hours they were supposed to, then the waiting list wouldn't be quite so long. Paul says, give doctors the 35% they're asking for, but make them sign to work for the NHS for a minimum of 10 years from the date of signing. What would you make to that suggestion? Look, after the break, speaking of money and who's paying what, Rishi Sunak's tax return is out. Have you seen it? £500,000 over, actually, is what he paid in tax last year. There's many people absolutely furious, saying that he's out of touch. Is he or not? I'll see you in 2.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
What you've got to do is, it's a collective. You've got to look like a meteorologist. Nobody out there is necessarily going to be a meteorologist, but what I do on a daily basis is I look globally. I look at what we've got in terms of the track of weather that we've had in the UK. So if you go back a couple of years and we go back to the heat wave of July, August 2022, 40.3 degrees, there's a dot in the landscape, and before then there was other incidents going on. Now that was a huge dot because that was extreme temperatures, and then we, you know, since then, last summer, although we didn't get that kind of record, we saw months with records, various months, May and June and September and October, all-time records. So another dot, and then you're looking again globally. What's going on globally? What's going on in China, in USA, in Africa, now in Australia, for example, records falling like 9 pins. So when these storms come along, you've got to say, okay, would they have happened anyway? The answer is probably yes, they probably would have done. But when you start getting where we're up to with Jocelyn is number 10, then that's not the record. The record is 11 named storms, 2015-16. So we've been there before, but only a few years ago. So these things are starting to mount up. And do you know what? On the can of climate change, climatologists, better people than me, people who study this expertly, and they look at it and they say, okay, what we're going to get with extra dimension of heat in the atmosphere, which energy and heat that basically means that you've got more intense storms potentially that can carry more water. What do you get? You get higher wind velocities and you get more water and or snow. We've just gone through a period where parts of this country have been deluged and flooded for the first time.
Yes. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hi there, this is Dewbs and Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7. The sketch writer and columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Madeline Grant, is alongside me, as is the trade unionist and broadcaster Paul Embry. It's Friday. It's about 7:15. It's my favourite time of the show/week. Dewberry Tavern is open. Cheers, everyone. Cheers to you. Cheers to you. And cheers to you. And cheers to all of you at home. Let's talk tax, shall we? Rishi Sunak, everyone. Are you sitting down? Are you sitting down? Because his tax return is out. And get this, everybody, eye-watering, some people might say. Long story short, he earned more than £2 million in the last tax year, and he paid over £500,000 in tax. Many people are livid about these sums of money. They're basically saying it shows that he's massively out of touch. Madeline, where are you on all this?
Well, I mean, I think that I'm quite wary of creating a public debate in which we pay such close attention to the private lives, wealth, family wealth, etc. of our politicians. I mean, ultimately, I'm more concerned about, are they capable, are they good at their job? And I wouldn't want to... There's already been, I've noticed, this topic comes up a lot more in politics. Labour have been pushing hard on it. They talk about, often they bring up, for example, Rishi Sunak's wife and her family wealth at PMQs, and I don't really like that. There used to be a bit of a kind of understanding that you don't bring people's families into it. I'm most interested in, are they good at their job? I don't think we should want to deter people who have had probably earned a lot of money in their previous career, have got lots of investments. I mean, I care if they're good at their job and delivering what they promise. I think that's how Rishi Sunak ought to be judged, rather than this.
Paul Embry?
Well, we've got his tax return on the desk here.
We do, and you want to see how much scribbling Paul's done on it.
I was going to say, Michelle, at first I thought it was yours, but then I realised there were a few noughts missing.
It's too low. If that was mine, it'd be eye-watering, 10 times bigger.
Obviously. I think he earned 15 times more through investments than he did as Prime Minister. I think he gets £139,000 for Prime Minister.
What's wrong with that?
Well, what I'm going to say is what that tells me is what that shows is how we reward, if you like, unearned wealth rather than actual work. You know, I just think in principle it's an indictment of a society that says, you know, someone as a Prime Minister working as hard as he does, even though I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, working as hard as he does, gets £139,000 but can earn 15 times that, essentially playing the markets with or getting people on his behalf
anyone can make investments, Paul.
Yeah, but well, fine, and I'm not saying he shouldn't be entitled to that money, but I think there is an argument to say that that kind of unearned wealth, if you like, should be, at the very least, we should equalise capital gains tax with income tax rates. I think that is a no-brainer, and that's something that, when you look at figures like that, you see how a measure like that would be completely justified.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of a separate debate.
What's your answer in principle, though? Should capital gains be taxed on a similar level to income?
I think that's reasonable, yes, because I think income tax is too high and particularly penalises people who are starting out who rely solely on their
So where's the risk factor then, you two? Because the whole point is, when you do a time-money exchange, i.e. you go to work and you get a salary, there's absolutely no risk whatsoever. I'm giving you my time, you're giving me some dosh, high five, thank you very much. When you're making investments, you're using post-tax income and you're taking a risk. Those investments may go up, those investments may go down. We're trying to stimulate the economy, we're trying to encourage entrepreneurial endeavour. So where is the risk rewarded in that?
We're stimulating a certain part of the economy, aren't we? We're obsessed in this country with financial services, and our economic policy for 40 years or more has been geared towards the demands of financial services, and what that's done is it means we have completely neglected our industrial base. It means we completely neglected our manufacturing base. With the Big Bang in the 80s, for example,
if people didn't invest in and grow businesses, Paul, there wouldn't be no jobs.
Flooded into London, and post-industrial Britain and small-town Britain, which thrived on manufacturing, was thrown under the bus, essentially, and we've paid a huge economic and social price for that.
I think it's possible to think that, we need to reprioritise manufacturing. I think actually more politicians are coming around to this idea when they see that actually in a more dysfunctional world, you can no longer rely on the same kind of supply chain.
Well, anyway, look, you can have the final say on that. Let me ask you this. Do you think we even need to see his tax return? What's it got to do with us? If you go into public office and then now all of a sudden, what, all of your income outside of public office is fair game, really? Are we going to encourage the best, brightest brains into public service in this country with that attitude or not? Or do you think actually you earn too much money, get in the bin, you're out of touch with everybody else? John says, why are you talking about how much Premier League football is there, Michelle? That's for another day. Paul Embry, thank you. Madeline Grant, thank you. Have a fantastic evening and weekend, and I will see you on Monday night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A mixed picture this weekend. Most of us will see some sunshine, but there will also be some showers, and there's still some snow falling over northern Scotland. Low pressure continues to dominate our weather. It's slowly pushing milder air further north, but still cold enough across northern Scotland for some sleet and snow. There's a Met Office warning in place here. Not huge amounts at low levels, but certainly some of the higher routes fairly nasty for travelling on overnight, with gusty winds an extra hazard, meaning that snow is blowing around. Rain for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, turning drier for much of England and Wales. Could turn a bit misty, not turning too cold. Saturday then looks like dry and bright for a good chunk of England and Wales. There'll be some sunshine here. It should brighten up through southern Scotland and across Northern Ireland too. The far north of Scotland, they're always staying wet, although the snow becoming increasingly confined to the tops of the mountains. Then showers coming in during the afternoon across Wales and southwest England. Temperatures on the high side for the time of year in the south, double digits, maybe 13 with a bit of sunshine, and slowly turning milder across Scotland as well. Sunday promises a lot of cloud, even some fog early on that could be slow to clear. There'll be a sprinkling of showers over central and southern England and northwest England and western Scotland too, but some sunny spells also likely. Temperatures close to average for the time of year, 6s and 7s across the north, 10 or 11 further south. Goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to Lee Anderson's Real World, and tonight on the show we've got the former CEO of Energy UK, that's Angela Knight. He's been let out the corner again. We've got Matthew Laza, former Labour Party advisor, he's back on the show. Matthew will be facing off against a second appearance from Benedict Spence. We'll also go back in the day with 100-year-old D-Day veteran William James Gladden. And for last orders, we're joined by